Hey honey bunnies. If you are already committed to a process of shadow work and you feel like you are currently undergoing shadow work, or you're, doing it fairly consistently in your life, or you've done some exercises pertaining to shadow work, then it's more than a little bit likely that in the past you were trying to avoid something that was wrong. You were trying to avoid a behaviour that you kept partaking in. And actually you began your shadow work because you recognised that you couldn't avoid it anymore. In fact, this is it's kind of impossible for you not to have ended up doing shadow work without that kind of happening to you. People come to shadow work because they recognise that the status quo has become untenable, because they realise that they have to take some accountability for whatever it is that's going wrong, because they realise they want to get to the bottom of something and they don't just want to accept the surface excuses that they've been giving or the surface reasons that they've been clinging on to. They want to go deeper, they want to really dive in. And that is really commendable work. That is a really admirable thing to do. And if you are a shadow worker, then I completely salute you, because it's not easy, and it definitely is something that can be very raw, and a lot of information can come up during a shadow work process that can be incredibly hard to swallow, really difficult to actually acknowledge. And after you have received that information, it's kind of up to you whether or not you want to use it in any kind of game-changing capacity. You can totally realise things in the midst of shadow work and then put those things back into a box, You don't have to consciously factor them into your life. You don't have to do anything with those pieces of information. I definitely think that just discovering things in the shadow alone is not enough to actually create a change which kind of ripples out into all areas of your life and does help you to understand yourself and other people in a different way. You can totally choose to put that information back in a box. And I've spoken to many clients over the time I've been doing this who have said that indeed they did begin on a process of shadow work and they did realise certain things did come to light that they then were too scared to take action on, and they were too scared to actually integrate that information into their sense of self. So they did stuff it back down again, and I've done this myself in my own shadow work process at times in the past, where I've kind of recognised something to do with myself and my behaviours, and I have felt almost like not ready to really imbibe that information. I felt not ready to absorb it totally yet, so I've just kind of swallowed it back down into the murky depths, and always to no avail. It's like I kind of eventually had to recognise that if I wanted to evolve in my understanding of self, then I had to allow that information to become integrated into my understanding of who I am. As a shadow worker, I would ask you to consider what it was that you were avoiding before you came to the realisation that you wanted to do shadow work. What was it that you were denying? What was it that you were turning away from that just kept having the run of your life and kept making things go wrong for you? How did you actually come to this point where you recognised that you didn't want to be a slave to that issue anymore? And what was the issue itself? I know for me that I started doing shadow work unbeknownst to me really at the age of 19, because I recognised that I had a lot of rage, I had a lot of anger issues. I was a very fucking angry kid. I was angry all through my adolescence, and between the ages of 17 and 19 a lot of stuff came to the surface. I would argue even between the ages of 14 and 19, but between the age of 17 and then the age of 19 where I had my breakdown, I definitely think a lot of stuff just kind of bubbled up inside of me. I had to acknowledge it. I was on a path to self-destruct. I was going in that direction without a doubt. I had been self-harming for quite a long time. I had been engaging in just, really violent rages and just fits of violent behaviour. I was just seething, I was frothing at the mouth. I was angry with the world. I was angry with various individuals. I was angry with various systems. I was angry about my past. I was angry about the way I felt about the future. I was angry about the fact that I had to become an adult. I was angry about all types of shit, And it was definitely something that I was clouded in without being conscious of it. And then at the age of 19 something kind of clicked for me, and I think it was as the result of getting with my first boyfriend at that time. It's ironic really looking back, because he didn't have the greatest amount of emotional intelligence. He was actually quite disconnected I would say, at that point in his life, from a lot of his own emotions and from a lot of his own inner world. But he was very interested in Eastern religion and philosophy, and he was definitely keen on ideas like meditation, and you know, he was really interested in the Tao, and he was interested in the idea of flow and the idea of kind of like being like the water and taking the path of least resistance. And he did sometimes talk about those ideas. He was not incredibly well versed in those ideas, and he was interested in other things too. Like, he was really interested in samurai culture. He was really interested in the idea of living off the grid, you know, and things like that. He was the one that made me look at myself and realise that I wanted to be less angry. I wanted to be less explosive. I wanted to be able to control myself more, and I wanted to be able to kind of have words with myself before I made a decision or carried out an action or said something that could potentially really hurt somebody and only serve to make the situation worse and to make me feel worse. I started by going into a field in the midst of some other fields, in the summer that I was 19, and just meditating. Between the ages of 19 and 21, I had another breakdown and a series of other small meltdown, kitchen floor moments, and I was on and off different medications, and I was seeing a therapist. I'm not saying by any means that, you know, I began this journey of understanding why I was angry and suddenly everything just clicked into place and everything was fine. By no means, you know. I think that the years between 19 and 25 were really a mishmash of different kind of stages of my own understanding of self, and certainly the initial stages were by no means the most profound or the most useful, but it was a massive start for me, you know, going into a field and just meditating, just sitting with myself and focusing on my breath, and reading about reading about Buddhism and reading about the idea of meditation and just the simple notion of mindfulness. That for me was absolutely huge. You know, I was not about that life at that time, so it was definitely something that I took on, this idea that these kinds of concepts could help me. And I really believe just the very moment that I realised that I needed to meditate, that I needed to calm the fuck down, and I needed to really begin to think about what my anger was doing to me, what it was doing to other people, and where it was coming from, where it was really coming from. That was the first moment in my life where I realised that I wanted to open up to what I would later learn was shadow work. I wanted to grasp hold of things that I did not yet have access to within myself. And that's what shadow work is. It's just literally plunging your arms down right up to the shoulder into the murky depths of the swamps of the psyche, where you cannot see what is down there. And that's why so many people are afraid of it, right? Because who the fuck wants to plunge their arms into a swamp? There could be a monster down there or anything. There could be tentacles that could grab you, and it could be so scary. And that's why shadow work is something that causes trepidation for people, and something that people kind of step tentatively towards and think, oh, is this what I want? Is this a good idea? You know? And for sure it can elicit that kind of response upon learning about shadow work and learning about what it is. It's the process of knowing that something is down there, you know, and that you are willing and you are ready to plunge your arms in, because you know that not knowing is just making things worse, and so you're prepared to kind of take those risks to glean the information, to get hold of that treasure that you need in order to complete the puzzle that is yourself. It takes balls, you know, and for me, I think it was the anger that I was avoiding. I was avoiding looking at myself. I was so, oh God, my anger was just addictive. It was visceral. I can feel it now, you know, coming over me like a black wave when I consider it. And for me, I was just done avoiding the fact that I was really, really angry, and it was really extreme, and it was incredibly damaging. You know, I was done blaming everybody else for that, and I was done trying to factor that out of my understanding of who I was. I realised that it was incredibly damaging. In all the years that I've been doing shadow work since that point, from that kind of very tender, organic moment of just doing it without knowing that it was called shadow work, or, you know, without clicking that it was shadow work, right up to now where I'm incredibly conscious of my own shadow work and also putting tools out into the world to help other people do theirs. Throughout all of that time, throughout my entire journey, one thing I've realised about the shadow work process is that it really just stops you from being able to ride the BS carousel, you know? The whole idea of shadow work is to bring things back to self. So rather than sitting in judgment of others, and rather than directing your anger towards towards other people or towards external situations and deciding, yes, these are the reasons why things have gone wrong. You know, if these people had acted differently, I wouldn't feel like this. Shadow work very much encourages you to bring it all back, bring it all home, you know, bring it back to yourself and what is going on with you and how you can make a decision from this point and how you want to feel about your life and about yourself. Shadow work becomes organic after a certain amount of time, you know. About 4 months ago, a situation occurred which was, I would say, it was the boiling over of the pot that had been slowly rising in its temperature for about 8 months beforehand. And, you know, it boiled over 4 months ago for me in my life personally. And after that time, I had a lot of anger to process, and I allowed myself to process my anger, and I will be making a video soon about anger. I've been writing the notes for it for a while now, trying to think about the different things that I do want to include and that I do want to touch on. And I let myself do the anger, and the anger rolled back around again a couple of times. You know, I thought I was done with it, and then it would come back through the door again. But what I noticed with this particular situation that occurred in just at the end of November, beginning of December 2015, was that I had a tremendous amount of judgment, and I was incredibly irate at a few individuals in my life. A lot of my brain power at first, when I was in that state of anger, was very much focused on what they had done to wrong me, what they had done to wrong themselves, how they were just going down a shitty path, and all these kinds of things. And I was really, I was focusing on what I had done to try and soothe the situation and heal the situation and bring my light to the situation. And I was focusing exclusively on what they had done to fuck it all up, rip it all apart, and just basically stay stuck in the same sorry cycle that they've been stuck in for ages. And so it was very much a superiority paradigm for me during that process of anger. Now that's very normal during a process of anger. You know, it's normal to focus on how you feel individuals have wronged you or how you feel that a situation has been unjust. I know that I need to give myself room to feel that anger and to process that anger, because I do feel that if you do not give anger its exit, it will hang around, you know, and it will just it will prevent you from moving on. I've learned this through my time working with clients. But when you're a shadow worker, you can never really sit with that forever. You know that that well of anger, that well of indignation and superiority and righteous rage towards others has got to dry up at some point, because you know that that is just externalizing, and it's pointing fingers, it's shooting arrows. It's not really the business of getting right, truly getting right with the situation from here, and healing and integrating the lessons so that you can really use them. So what I'm trying to say is that you can never stop at it's everybody else's fault. You can have that moment, you can feel that feeling, you can process that shit, and it's important not to deny it. But shadow work will not let you drop anchor there. If you're a shadow worker, then you know that there's this whole other stage. And this whole other stage is what I'm starting to come into now with my specific situation, where I'm looking at what I did, what I didn't do, what I didn't see, and whereabouts the patterns exist for me in my life. Like what does this situation remind me of? How is it familiar to me? How has it manifested in my life before? I'm bringing it back to self, and it's not about blaming myself, and it's not about letting those people off the hook and, you know, somehow trying to convince myself that they didn't do anything that was unjust towards me and that they didn't, you know, behave dishonorably. It's not about that. It's about knowing as a shadow worker that despite how dishonorably they behaved, this journey is about me. Okay, and I can only do me. I can only heal me. I can only learn for me. I can only swallow those lessons for myself and be in this world myself. Essentially what shadow work does is it kind of very firmly reminds you that the rest of somebody else's life is none of your fucking business. You have to begin to focus on how you can strengthen from this, what you can understand from this. When you're a shadow worker, you can't tell yourself forever that it's everybody else's fault. And even if you cannot find any fault with yourself, that doesn't matter. You stop focusing on the faults that everybody else has, because you're too busy figuring out what it means for you that you have been exposed to these people's faults. What does it mean for you that you let these people in? What does it mean for you that you now need to move on and learn the lessons from this? You know, so even if you cannot find fault with yourself and you really do feel that somebody else behaved dishonourably and you only tried to kind of solve the situation, or you were only acting with integrity, shadow work still stops you from consciously deciding to spend your life throwing arrows, you know. It really does bring it back to the core, and it helps you to understand how your roots can grow deeper in the earth as a result of what you've been through. When clients ask me, how do I use tarot with my shadow work? How can I use oracle with my shadow work? You know, what can I ask the cards to help me to deepen my shadow work? I always invariably say, ask the deck the question that you really don't want the answer to, you know. And 9 times out of 10 that question is going to be, what did I do to create this situation? What did I fail to see? What am I refusing to acknowledge? Where am I wrong? Where am I confused? Where am I not seeing an evident truth? What can I learn? How could I have done better? Bringing it back to self feels really, it's difficult, it's raw, it's difficult, it's vulnerable, and so I always think that the tools that we use to do our shadow work, we should use to chip away at that egoic desire to just blame others, to see fault in the external situation, rather than recognising a wound from within that led us to that place, or a confusion we have about ourselves that led us into some very familiar trap. Shadow work is about knowing that that's okay. You know, it's okay to do that, and it actually makes all the sense in the world to do that, and it is a supremely self-loving thing to do. You're going to have sticking points in your shadow work, like everybody, you know. People have those things that they need to circle back around to. And I often do say that sometimes you think you've learned a lesson and you think you've put it to bed, and then it comes along in a different form, in a different guise, at a different time, in a different situation. And it can be tempting to berate yourself and to think, but I've shadow worked this to death, you know. I've shadow worked the shit out of this issue. Why is it back at my door? It can be really tempting to belittle yourself, you know. And I always just say that sometimes you need to learn a lesson from the new place, you know. Sometimes you learn a lesson from a specific point in your life in a specific way in accordance with who you are at that time. But then as you go through your life, you become different versions of yourself. You shed skins, you release old beliefs and you adopt new ones. New experiences come along and they mould you into a slightly different shape. And sometimes you need to revisit that lesson from who you are in the present, and that is okay. And with sticking points, with these things that stay in the shadow that you can't seem to completely get rid of, I always say that it's really important to learn to sit with those things. Sometimes the lesson is just to sit with that thing that you so try to claw your way out of and you so try to shadow work your way through. I speak to some clients who have reached some kind of an impasse with their work. They feel like there's this one specific thing, let's say just for an example, just plucking something out of the air, that you really are stuck with the competition paradigm. Like no matter how much you try to release yourself from that paradigm, you still feel like you've got to compete, you've got to be better than, like everything is a challenge that you have to ultimately win. If you really diligently shadow work your way through that issue, if you really try and find the root of the root of the root of that issue, and you really try and kind of work it into your understanding of who you are so that it stops having control over you, then maybe sometimes you're pushing too hard for results. And when you push really, really hard against something that feels like it's pushing against you, there is that stalemate, there is that sense of stagnation. Sometimes the lesson in shadow work is to sit with it and be with it. Just sit with it and be with it. Let it wash over you. Be in the presence of it, you know. We are so scared to feel our fucking feelings and to just be in that unfolding moment. It's horrible. It really is so horrible. In my 29 Shadows course, which I will leave the link for below, you can go over and check it out. It's 29 videos about shadow work. Each video is on a different theme, and it's very reasonably priced for what it is too. It launched in February, but I am selling it, so if you're interested you can check it out. And in one of those videos I describe a moment that I had where I was trying to get away from a strong emotion that I was having. It was a very strong emotion of loss and pain, kind of mixed with anger. And I was trying to avoid it and get away from it and pretend that it wasn't washing over me by talking about it. And I was talking and talking and talking, and I was raging and I was seething and I was going off on one, you know, just like raging towards my boyfriend about this thing that had happened. And I realised after a while that actually I was trying to talk my way around it or over the top of it or underneath it. I was trying to not go through it, and I was using talking as some kind of a band-aid. And I realised that I had to stop and I had to just feel it. I had to just feel it. And it was really, really tough, you know, and the tears came and I was like, oh, that deep down hurts. It's only once you sit with that you can move past, you know, it's only once you sit with that you can learn from. And sometimes I think if something just won't go away and you just can't seem to shake something in shadow work, it could be because you haven't fully permitted yourself to feel it yet. And feel it from this place where you are now, you know, feel it in the present. People are often scared to let themselves feel something that they've been avoiding for a long time or trying to downplay for a long time because they're scared of the breakdown, you know. They're scared of what I like to call the kitchen floor moment, that moment where you just break. You know, it's a moment of real, vulnerable, radical acceptance that can only take place when you really go there. And when you really, really go there, you do break down. You know, it does feel like a cracking open, but that's breaking down to break through, baby. That's what it is. And it is scary, and you have to hold yourself. You have to hold yourself. You have to be in that moment your mother, your father, your God. You have to do that. And once you've done that, that's true self-love. It's very easy, it's very, very easy to talk about self-love in the great moments where you just got that job you wanted, or you feel like you're really manifesting something, you're in a great relationship with somebody who constantly tells you how fucking fabulous you are and validates you. It's very easy to feel self-love when you're on the up. It's not easy to practice self-love when you're on the fucking floor, when you've lost everything. It's not easy to practice self-love when you feel like shit, when you feel terrified, when you feel like you're never going to get what you want, when you feel like you're reaching out in the dark and that hand you're looking for is not there. In those moments, if you can self-soothe, in those moments, if you can tell yourself, I am with you and I love you and it's going to be okay, baby. If you can do that, then you truly know the meaning of self-love, and you know the depths of self-love, and you know that it is that strong foundation. Self-love is not a fucking lavender-scented candle-lit bath. Self-love is not a new outfit. Self-love is not, you know, choosing the right filter on Instagram. Self-love is toughing it out with yourself, for yourself, while you wade through piss and shit and agony. When you can do self-love at your lowest point, then it really means something at your highest point. Breaking down to break through is holding yourself in that moment. And that can be, of course, very scary, but it's unbelievably profound, and the payoff is like indescribable, unimaginable, invaluable, in fact. Being a shadow worker is everything, you know, it really does inform the decisions that I make, and it shapes the way that I look at situations that happen to me. It does not mean that I have everything, you know, on lock all the time and everything is perfect for me and I never go through the same trials and tribulations that other people go through. It just means that it's a lens that I put over the issues that I go through. It's a lens that I put over my eyes in order to look at the relationships in my life or to look at the goals that I've set for myself. And I really feel that it has enhanced and enriched my life. If you're a shadow worker, then I commend you for being on this journey, and if you're thinking of becoming one, then I totally commend you for that too. I think it's brave and I think it's sumptuous, and I think it can give us so much if we are willing, if we are really willing to go there, and if we're willing to be an ally to ourselves in that moment and in the moments afterwards when we're in the midst of shadow work, where we find those realizations, we experience those points of illumination which do lead to game-changing things. Stepping into shadow work and hoping that nothing really changes is kind of like getting on a train and hoping that it doesn't leave the station, you know, hoping that it just sits on the platform. Shadow work is something where, you know, you've got to like buy the ticket and take the ride kind of thing. You've got to know that it is going to go somewhere, and it's, you know, it will change the game. Some things won't survive, and I feel comforted by that now in this moment. I feel comforted by the fact that some relationships, some beliefs, some goals, some things that I thought defined me will not survive through a process of shadow work, but that's okay, because they were never really meant for me. That's okay. Shadow work burns everything clean for me. My ego may fear shadow work. My ego may want the train to stay on the platform, but my spirit wants that train to fucking go, and take me somewhere, show me something I haven't seen before, show me what you got. You know, that's kind of the attitude that I come to my shadow work with, and that's got to be how it is. These have been some shadow work musings. I hope they've been helpful and illuminating and inspiring, and I hope they've accompanied you on your incredible, unique life journey. Much love, blessed be.